Okay, so continuing with the hows. So we got all the parts. Now we can figure out what they are doing. So this process of ventilation, that's also breathing, basically, is moving the air from the atmosphere, the stuff out here all around you that contains the oxygen, into the body, and then expelling, right, the carbon dioxide inside your body back out into the atmosphere. So yes, you contribute to greenhouse gases and part of the global warming of this planet. So do be aware of that, right? That doesn't mean don't exhale, because you clearly have to, but do be aware. This is part of the part of a process. So air movement in is called inspiration or inhalation, and out is expiration or exhalation. And these basically happen because of a very, very simple principle called Boyle's law, which governs this idea of how pressure and volume, their relationship to each other. Now, we've looked at this relationship when in the other chapters, in the cardiovascular especially, and we will continue to look at this idea again when we talk about blood volume and blood pressure. Here, the volume change we're looking at is really a change in the size of the container. So, again, volume is defined, by a space. So this is actually the space of the container, which is your thoracic cavity, specifically your lungs and your pleural cavities, etc. All right? And so if you change the size of a cavity or space, the size of a container, you'll automatically, right, by increasing that volume, you will decrease the pressure in that container, which is a good thing because it's the pressure difference that actually is going to move the air. So you literally suck air in because as you inhale, you expand or increase the volume in your thoracic cavity, your lungs specifically, and pleural cavity, etc. And as you're increasing this, the pressure in there is dropping. And the pressure in there is lower than, of course, the pressure in the atmosphere around you, all this air that's around you. And so it's low, right, pressure inside and high pressure outside. So automatically air moves from high to low and you suck air in. So I said here, you've got to consider atmospheric pressure, air pressure within the alveoli, and pressure within the pleural cavities. Okay, so this is the abbreviations for those. But this is, this is the point. We're going to move air when we have an area where it's higher and an area where it's lower. And all right, so this is looking at the simplicity, or simple. And this is a genius, observational by Boyle, but called Boyle's law again because it is just, we've never seen anything that differs from this. So every time you do this, the same thing happens. So every time you get an increase in volume, the pressure in the container decreases. And so and every time you decrease the volume here, and they're using a piston to, shove it, then the pressure increases, right? Just all the time. So we were really thinking of this container again as a thoracic cavity. And how are we going to do the pistony movement here? Well, that's, a lot of it's going to be the diaphragm when you're at rest. So I said to move the air, there has to be a difference in pressure. Because if the air is equal, the pressure in the air in the atmosphere is equal to the pressure in the lungs, there is no movement. And you will stop moving air when these do come to equilibrium. Okay, and so the pressure comes from, again, the movement of the molecules in the space that they are in, this container. The less space, the more pressure. So to create differences in pressure, you just need to change the volume. So this is really the important thing. All right, so how does this work? All right, again, atmospheric pressure due to the weight of air. So air coming down through the miles of atmosphere that surround this earth and protect it, right, is full of all these different molecules. And so because they're there, they provide pressure, right? This isn't going to change for you. You'd have to go to a different altitude to see a change in this. And of course, if you did, it would affect the movement of air as you think about people who go to higher altitudes having a harder time breathing, right? But here, with all these molecules weighing down on us at sea level in Texas, we are somewhere around 760 millimeters of mercury. You don't have to remember that, but that is one atmosphere of pressure. And the other pressures are going to be related to this, right? So this is a fundamental one we start with. So the interalveolar pressure, so inside within the alveoli, is the air in the alveoli. I mean, they've cut them off here to show you this idea, but they're all over in here, right? And the changes with the phase of breathing. So as you're inhaling and exhaling. Since connected to the atmosphere through the trachea, right, the pressure always equalizes, okay? And I said once it's equal, there won't be movement. And then the intrapleural pressure is really in this cavity between, which doesn't exchange with the environment if it can help it, right, with the atmosphere, and doesn't exchange with the alveoli. It's not continuous. So it's within this, always changes with the phase, but always less, all right? So again, it's not ever, we're not going to equalize the pressure in here because that would be a problem. If pressure builds up in this space we call the cavity, well then we can collapse the lungs, right? Because it's going to be pushing against it. So we always refer to intrapleural pressure as a negative pressure. It must always be less than the alveoli or you're going to collapse the lung. And again, you'll do this in a PhysioX to show this idea. All right, so physical factors affecting this movement. So what else helps us move this air besides pressure? Well, contracting and relaxing muscles. This is really what changes the volume. The diaphragm and the thorax muscles, all right? There's some intercostals, so in between the ribs themselves. And then there's some that attach to the costals, all right, like the pectoralis minor and the sternocleidomastoids, right? So, and they can assist with these pressure changes. They will be affected, all right? This movement of air will be affected by the pleural fluids, surfactant, surface tension, and the elastic nature of the lungs. So we're going to stay tuned. Each of these is going to be something that could influence or would influence movement of air, as we're saying here. So we want to keep track of these, all right? Resistance slows flow. So just like what we talked about in the cardiovascular system, if there's more resistance, and resistance happens when the tubes get smaller, and you're going to look at this in assimilation of asthma. So size of airways matter. Surface tension in the alveoli, right, will inhibit expansion. So this is going to prevent this increase in size, which decreases pressure. Okay, but that surface tension is going to help us when we exhale, because we need to become really small to exhale. We need to build pressure up when we exhale. Surfactant decreases surface tension, so surfactant helps us inhale, and it helps us be able to expand our alveoli. And remember, those are made by those type 2 cells. And compliance is really referring to the nature of all this elastic. So when you're compliant, think of balloons, right? You can stretch more. And we talk about compliance in the respiratory system and in the cardiovascular system. So the more compliant the lungs, the easier it is to stretch them. So compliance is what really decreases when you talk about restrictive pulmonary diseases, right? Like emphysema that you're also going to test. All right, so air will flow from high pressure to low pressure. That's the rule. All right, as soon as you create a gradient or difference in this, we're going to get that. So when you inspire, right, flow in during inhalation because atmospheric pressure is greater than intra-alveolar, which is greater than intrapleural. And remember, again, that's not really part of the exchange. It just allows us to expand the lungs. Expiration flows out because the intrapleural pressure is greater than the atmospheric. So again, here we're going to have to make all these spaces as small as possible so the volume decreases to increase pressure. And again, I say note that the intrapleural is always negative and doesn't participate. All right, so muscles that make this happen. All right, so inhaling, exhaling. So when you normally inspire, so this is what we think of at rest. You just need this amount of oxygen in so that you can actually, right, carry on your cell respiration. So diaphragm and external intercostals. So these are moving, they connect these costals to each other. They're on the outside, and there's some internal intercostals too, but they're not participating in inhaling. They participate in exhaling, right? So when you inhale, you first start by expanding or increasing the size of the thoracic cavity, the volume of the container. And to do this, again, as I show you here, the diaphragm, which is normally rounded up when it's relaxed, as it shortens, it pulls down. So the cavity or space gets larger. And these external intercostals also help to pull out the chest. All right, so I say, and then due to the adhesive forces of that pleural fluid we mentioned, the expansion of the cavity forces the lungs to stretch. So remember, they're all stuck to each other here with the parietal pleural right up against these muscles. So as I'm increasing the space by moving these muscles, I'm pulling the lungs. And so their whole container gets larger. All right? This increase in volume will decrease this intra-alveolar pressure and air will be sucked in. All right? When you expire, you just got to decrease the volume and increase the pressure. So again, start by making everything smaller. It is a passive process. So when you normally exhale, you do not have to put any energy into it. No muscles are contracting. In fact, everybody's relaxing. So your expiration starts when your diaphragm and external intercostals just relax. They stop, right? And again, here, nerves are going to tell them, stop. Stop your contraction cycle. And so they move back into their original positions. And as such, right, we remember that the diaphragm is going to bow up and the external intercostals are going to pull down. And so the whole cavity becomes smaller, has less volume. This means pressure builds up, right? So this is assisted by, right, elastic recoil of the lungs. So the lungs are like rubber bands. I said like a balloon. You have blown it up and then you let it go, right? And it just, air comes out, right? And surface tension also allows for this. So surface tension impedes or prevents or resist inhaling, but is necessary because it helps us exhale. But surface tension is never going to win, right? In other words, you're never going to collapse your alveoli because of surfactant. But these factors together, again, elastic recoil, surface tension, right, relaxing muscles, all cause the intra-alveolar pressure to go higher than atmospheric, and air is pushed out of the lungs. You exhale. So if I need to move more, because this will work for me at rest, but what if I start to become active? What if I need to walk quickly or run after my kids or something like that? So what do I need to do then? All right. So you must meet your body's needs. That's the point. The respiratory system is serving the body. So when I need more air, I've got to get more of a change in the size or volume. All right. So need to bring more air into the body. You have to create a bigger pressure difference. So this time we're going to enlist, if we are inhaling, the scalenes, the sternocleidomastoids, and the pectoralis minor. And I'll have you identify a few of these in lab. And if I'm exhaling, I got to get an even smaller volume of the thoracic cavity. So here I'm going to use the internal intercostals and the abdominal wall muscles, right? Those transversus, those rectus, and those obliques. All right? So then here shows the differences I can make, right? Because here's these actual volumes of air that's moved. And remember, the air will move until I reach equal pressures in and outside. So if I need more oxygen, I have to move more air. And this is a measure of that capability. So your lung function shown here in a spirogram, right? And so we talk about the volumes you're capable of, and then the capacities, what the potential is. So how much moves and how much can I move, all right? This is called a spirometer, so that's the actual measurement, and this is a spirogram. And we look at our respiratory health when we judge this, all right? So this is nicely color-coded, and here we again see it without the tracing on it, the idea, except for the tidal volume here. Here's the capacities and here's the volumes. So here I can measure with everything but the residual volume, and here I add components. So if I'm talking about your inspiratory capacity, that's the reserve volume and tidal volume. Functional residual capacity is the expiratory reserve and the residual volume. Vital capacity are inspiratory reserve volume, expiratory reserve volume, and tidal volume. And then total lung capacity is really putting all of these together, honestly, right? Your inspiratory, expiratory. All right, so this we look at in lab as well, and we look at in a PhysioX. So this is showing you the ideas, right, and defining these. Pulmonary functional instrument, so it's called spirometry. It's done by a spirometer, all right? And then we have gas diffusion and blood gas analyzer, which are different ways to measure, all right? So here again, all these different terms we just went through, we generally abbreviate them, and here's then, of course, their definitions, which you're going to see in lab and lecture. So we'll come back to this concept of anatomic dead space and alveolar dead space on the next video.